The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Counsel to Counsel Forum, and thanks for joining us today. We're going to get started now with our program, and I, Michael Dilworth, will be your host and moderator of today's Counsel to Counsel panel. But before we get to introductions, I'd like to mention that we want to make today's presentation as interactive as possible. So if you're in the audience, you have any questions as you're listening along today, you're encouraged to submit questions through the questions tool in the GoToWebinar user interface. So please take a moment to locate that on your screen and feel free to submit questions as we go along. We'll be reserving about 10 or so minutes towards the end of the program to answer any questions that are submitted. Also at the end of today's webinar, you'll be receiving a very short poll where you can let us know if you'd be interested in joining a future Counsel to Counsel discussion, as well as provide us with any feedback to help us improve and make these events as valuable as possible to you. The poll should literally take no more than about 30 seconds or so to complete, and we really appreciate that. So now on to today's discussion. I'm Michael Dilworth, U.S. Registered Patent Attorney, founder and managing member of the intellectual property law firm Dilworth IP. My firm's been hosting a successful webinar series for several years now, but today's session represents something new for us in that it is our first panel discussion by in-house IP counsel and represents the launch of the Counsel to Counsel Forum, which is a virtual space where in-house counsel can share ideas, experiences, and best practices with one another. So before founding my firm 11 years ago, I worked in-house myself for almost 7 years. And while I love my time in-house, I certainly found that the job came with its own unique set of demands. And I'm sure we're going to be getting into some of that today. We hope you get something valuable out of today's panel discussion. I'm truly excited to be the moderator of today's fantastic panel of speakers. So now on to the panelists. We're going to begin with some brief introductions. I'd like to invite each of the panelists to share a little bit about themselves, their backgrounds, and the companies they work for. So why don't we head off with Catherine Toppin from GE. Over to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Michael. This is Catherine Toppin. I'm Senior Patent Counsel and Manager at General Electric. I work for a group within corporate that supports the businesses from an IP function across all of the divisions. As most of you know, GE is a conglomerate, and ever-shrinking conglomerate, but a conglomerate nevertheless, in a number of technical spaces, including healthcare, aviation, power, transportation, and beyond. I'm glad to be here and look forward to the panel.
Thanks for joining us today, Catherine. And David Joyal of Coty, over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Michael, for the opportunity. My name is David Joyal. I'm the VP Legal for Patents here at Coty. Coty, for those that are not aware, is a beauty company, the third largest beauty company in the world now, in recently a much bigger beauty company by virtue of acquiring much of Procter & Gamble's beauty business, CoverGirl, Max Factor, etc. Thrilled to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, David. And lastly, George Romanek, formerly of Lanxess.
Mike, thanks. I'm George Romanek. I've been in the IP world for about 30 years now, and for about almost the past 20, been in the leadership role. So being an executive at Pratt & Whitney, becoming the Chief IP Counsel at Hamilton Sundstrand, which is now known as United Technologies Aerospace Systems, Chief IP Counsel at Pratt & Whitney, and then Chief IP Counsel at Chemtura. That became Lanxess a little bit over a year ago when Lanxess purchased that business. So pretty extensive in-house experience.
Great. And so as you can see, we have a superstar lineup of speakers today, and I'm really excited to get into our questions. So let me lead off with the topic of IP awareness within your companies. And as we all know, we live in an intensely competitive world, and companies that successfully protect their IP can maintain and sustain advantages over their competitors. But to do this successfully, Some kind of systemic knowledge about IP and its importance across the entire organization is required. That sounds great in theory, but can be challenging to implement in practice. So my first question to the panelists today is, as in-house IP counsel, primarily responsible for protecting the company's IP, how do you build an IP-aware culture? George, let's start off with you.
Okay, sure. One of the first steps is to get an idea of what the overall company culture is, and by that I mean understand whether it's sort of a top-down culture, a bottoms-up culture, or how that works, and then to look for ways to tie IP themes into the culture. So, in my experience, I've generally done that a couple of ways. Most of the companies I've worked with tend to have a very strong compliance culture, focus on ethics and things like that. And if you take a look at the compliance codes or ethics codes of a lot of companies and read through them in detail, one element that's usually in there has to do with protecting company assets, and if it's good, even more explicitly, it talks about IP. So there's a jumping off point right there to use to tie into company culture. And the better policies that I've seen a variety of these, also talk about respecting property or IP rights belonged by others. That kind of gives you a jumping off point to talk about two of the main IP themes. Protect company IP, so protect what we develop, and then make sure we don't infringe valid IP rights that belong to others. So those are generally big high-level statements that I then have used as a way of communicating down to the organization. And then beyond that, the main thing is to identify who the key clients are within the company and help them generate wins that show the value of IP. And those clients can be business clients, so you can show how IP rights help them when it comes to marketing their products, making sales, engaging their customers to demonstrate the high technical value of the products, or the R&D organizations to help them defend or to protect their IP rights, and then across the whole organization to make sure you steer clear of infringing others. So that's the approach that I've taken pretty successfully in a number of organizations.
That's great. Thanks, George. And Catherine, at GE, does GE have a systemic IP training program? And how widely
sure.
is it?
Go ahead. Sorry, Michael.
Oh no, just who has to attend those training seminars or webinars?
So we do have some optional training. So I mean, GE, with the company the size of GE, north of 300,000 employees, we have trainings of all types. So we have some that are accessible just as an optional matter, just kind of electronic. There's a whole training platform where you can go and access various trainings from, IP 101 to more, tax implications of IP, and we host those in a virtual library. But I think the training that's more kind of meaningful is the one that's really dedicated towards the specific audience, typically the engineering teams. And you'll find, a wide variety of awareness of IP implications for our engineering folks. Anyone who's coming in as a new engineer or new employee is kind of given a, first they have to sign a document that forces them to be aware of their obligations with respect to IP. But on top of that, there are just plenty of kind of boilerplate trainings that you have to go through to discuss, why do you want to not tell competitors or some of your colleagues at other companies about, some of the projects that you're working on, et cetera. But going back to what's really influential is when you have an IP counsel who's able to, on a periodic basis, provide a training that's targeted to a specific audience and provide examples with their technology, their related technology in mind. And of course, that has to be tailored. That happens more on an ad hoc basis, pretty routinely, probably every 1 to 2 years by IP Counsel, depending on their division. But it really, really is important to emphasize and also equip the engineers with what they should know about how to best protect IP. Aside from that, on the culture standpoint, believe it or not, some of the things that, impact the culture the most are the inventors themselves who like to, we have certain business divisions who are very, very keen on providing visual prizes for inventors who've obtained patents. So, trophies, hats, regular posters. We've done poster campaigns within, various divisions. I worked pretty extensively with the healthcare business at one point. And there was, we literally had an IP day where, we rolled out some of the most recent inventions that we received patents on in the US and did a big celebration for anyone, in addition to just regular awards programs financially and otherwise. There's just a lot of visibility to, what's going on in the IP space, and we make it, we make a big deal of it beyond just inventor awards. So I think those small touches really help. For me, though, absolute number one is the top-down approach. Whenever you have an executive, particularly not in the legal side of the house, but you have someone in the engineering space who makes IP awareness, whether that's training or disclosure submission, something that is part of the goals and objectives of the team, whether that's an engineering team or marketing team or the like, that is what really makes the difference in spreading and maintaining an IP-aware culture.
Yeah, that's great, Catherine. Really appreciate that. And I know the company that I used to work for had an inventor award ceremony once a year, and all the inventors came out and were hosted to a nice dinner and given recognition, and that went a long way towards fostering, a culture of innovation within the company. As we know, there are a lot of companies, just in particular the ones represented on this call, at least through their in-house IP counsel, are global organizations, and in a global setting like yours, I imagine you must deal with different cultures, different perspectives, certainly different laws in different jurisdictions as they pertain to intellectual property. Have you dealt with any issues there in terms of fostering IP awareness on a global scale across different cultures and languages? What barriers have you found, encountered, and what are you doing to overcome those? David, maybe you can address some of that.
Sure thing. Just first to follow briefly on George and Catherine's comments. Excellent points on how you build a culture. The only piece I would add is if you're in a situation like what Cody has, you're building a culture essentially from scratch because you're starting with a new company. So finding those influencers that Catherine talked about and working with them to get into meetings and show wins, then gets you to training, gets you to the whole organization. And for me, for a small department, having systems in place before you do the training is important, because if you're as thinly staffed as we are, which is basically a single patent attorney for a 20,000 person organization, 13 billion in sales, then you have to have some systems, invention disclosure, freedom to operate, to be able to manage the workload. And you want to have those before you start rolling out large scale training. That's important, I think, on a cross-cultural perspective, because there are big differences culturally in terms of how you communicate, I think, in places like Brazil and China and Germany versus the United States. And there's also huge differences in a business like mine on the IP awareness, which is something that both George and Catherine touched upon. There's a lot of difference, for example, in my field, in some of the IP awareness for scientists that work in the hair research area where there's a lot of patents and a lot of competition versus R&D or marketing professionals that would work in the fast fashion, the fast beauty industry, where speed to market in following trends is important, and technical barriers or technical issues aren't thought of as much. So trying to find a way to build trust with people, working with local counsel, working with a diverse slate of attorneys, or working with a diverse set of peer mentors in your group that help you become a better communicator and a better service to the business is really important.
That's great. Thanks, David.
Yeah, and let me add one. Yeah, this is George. Let me add one thing that hasn't come up yet, especially when in the context of dealing internationally. It does help to be at least generally familiar with local IP laws, at least to the extent as to whether they require mandatory inventor compensation. So in the U.S., you know, there's no such thing as a mandatory inventor compensation. A lot of companies do compensate inventors, some don't. But there are other countries, and Germany is one that comes to mind, but there are a number of others where there are very explicit rules in the local patent statutes that require the companies to take certain steps when inventors send in invention disclosures. So you may have to formally accept the invention, and if you don't, the ownership reverts to the inventor potentially. And there are certain guidelines on how to do compensation. So Germany is one of those. A number of the Central European countries that have patent laws like Germany are like that. China has a law like that. Japan has a law like that. So that's something just to be aware of if you have an inventor base that touches on some of those countries, that you need to have some systems in place to be able to address those local requirements.
Yeah, thanks, George. Absolutely correct. And I remember having to deal with the German inventor compensation laws, and it's actually quite an interesting obligation on the part of the company to track invention disclosures and formally respond and make sure it preserves its rights. It's actually a very good call out. Thank you. Next topic on deck is assessing outside counsel, and I'd like to pose the question to the panel. You know, what tools do you use to assess outside counsel relationships on an ongoing basis? And do you define and monitor prosecution quality? And how do you do that? Why don't we lead off with Catherine?
Yeah, sure. So just from an operational standpoint, you know, we used outside counsel, for example, for a number of like for priority drafting, and we keep metrics on the timing of when, you know, drafts are sent out and when we receive those drafts back, to make sure that we keep our filings kind of rolling along. I mean, given the size of how many applications we file, we have to be very careful about making sure that they don't get long in the tooth, especially with, you know, the laws being the way they are and first to file being applicable now in the U.S. But we do kind of keep tabs on operationally how long things are have been outstanding with outside counsel. We don't keep track of, you know, smaller things like, you know, how many RCEs were filed by a particular outside counsel, though we can tell obviously there's some strategic reasons where that those types of things may apply. Some other, you know, a lot of the metrics that we use are more anecdotal, and believe it or not, those tend to be the things that matter most. You know, whether your sense is that outside counsel is acting as a business partner, are they making suggestions about, you know, when to drop a case, rather than just continuing to prosecute if we feel like the, you know, it's not worthwhile. So the more outside counsel can act as a business partner, an extension of, you know, what we would do rather than, you know, just a build vendor, the better. I don't know
George, you have
if
anything to add to
George or David.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah. Let me jump in on that. So I've used formal metrics sometimes, the types of metrics that Catherine had mentioned, tracking timelines on filing applications once they're handed off to a law firm and things like that. One of the things that I do like to look at, and this is maybe more the informal sort of feedback that Catherine was getting at, is in addition to thinking about what the firms are recommending to the in-house legal team, also get feedback from the inventors to get their feel for the relationship with the outside law firm. It's not that as an inside lawyer I necessarily want the inventors to drive the relationship there. I think it's important that the in-house legal team have a strong role in that. But I'm also looking for a good cultural fit between the outside law firm and the inventors or other internal clients that they're working with, on the thought that if there are problems there, the problems are going to come right back to the in-house lawyers to go address and fix. So that's something I want to make sure there's a good relationship there. A lot of it, just given how the dynamic works, is done remotely by emails and phone calls, and a risk with that is you tend to lose the personal touch. So what I would always like to do is periodically get the lawyers from the outside firms. Sometimes you can't get all the lawyers in because there's a lot, but get some in periodically and have them meet face to face with the engineers, and not necessarily in the context of working on an application, even more social sort of thing, just to get that dynamic going and that personal connection. I think that's an important role in just getting that whole cultural fit between the outside firms and the inside clients working.
Yeah, I'd love to amplify what. Yeah, sorry.
Sure. Go for it.
Yeah, what George just said is really helpful. I can't tell you how many times the feedbacks from one of our paraprofessionals or paralegals is of critical importance, because they have a sense of the operational excellence of a particular outside counsel. And whenever you hear positive feedback from an inventor, where the outside counsel has demonstrated they can really speak their language, that speaks volumes. Because I've advocated to keep, outside counsel sometimes at a slightly higher cost, because they were so integrated with the business and had such a fantastic rapport with the inventors that we didn't want to, provide any additional roadblocks to ensuring that, the critical aspects of an invention were being translated into an application. So, inventor feedback is huge, as is paraprofessional feedback.
Excellent points. Somewhat related
and I just
topic. Go ahead, David.
Go ahead. Sorry. I was going to say, just to jump in very quickly.
Yep.
Again, to amplify what George and Catherine said. What the inventors come back to you with is critical, because the right attorney with the right personal approach and the right technical skills is worth every penny. I mean, one thing that Joe McGillicuddy, my boss at Avon, taught me is take a look at your portfolio and ask what it's worth for you, and then go out to your firms and demand rates that reflect that. But that also means that not all IP is created equally. And if there's certain IP that's critical to the business, then you make room in your budget to make sure that you get the best working on that case, and you budget efforts or number of RCEs, any of these metrics accordingly. The one other thing I would add is for us with such a lean department, again, what value add do you bring? Do you collaborate let's say as a U.S. attorney? Are you that we're very leanly staffed? Are you reaching out to our European and Japanese and Mexican and Brazilian outside firms? Are you coordinating responses? Are you suggesting when you first draft a case that the claims get reviewed by European counsel? Are you suggesting a single claim be filed in Japan to save costs? If you're thinking that way, from a business sense to save us money, and from how do I get the strongest patent around the world and most efficient prosecution, that's a huge plus for us.
Yeah, David, what you said is so critical because I just can't tell you how many times, we'll ask for a strategy letter, in response to an office action, for example, and what there will be is just some generic proposals and generic distinctions rather than our outside counsel actually saying, if I were you, if this were my patent, if you will, here's how I would approach it. And that business partner mindset is really what provides a distinction between one outside counsel or another. And, as David mentioned, if you are asking the right questions, hey, is this going to be foreign files? Where is it likely to go? So we can make sure that we build in the requisite support if we're going into Asia or Europe or some of the more strict countries around, software or the like. Doing that additional due diligence really stands out. And you would think that it's kind of a natural thing for folks to think about, but it's really not. Some people just look at each, individualized matter, particularly in the prosecution space, as, a discrete thing rather than, hey, how does this fit into the overall portfolio? And I recognize that sometimes, the client kind of doesn't provide that context. But to the extent that you can ask those questions up front, the more you're going to be able to distinguish yourself as an outside counsel business partner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is George. Let me follow on that. I agree with David's comments and Catherine's comments. And just I was thinking about it in the context of outside counsel outside the United States. So this is, we take for a lot of us, the invention is first filed in the U.S. and then take it elsewhere. Just thinking about how I assess the foreign law firms is the extent to which they try to get the way a U.S. company values IP, and generally, and then more specifically, how your company, how you value the IP. So they have a notion of that, and beyond that, have them focus on making sure they're giving you a prosecution that takes advantage of all the local rules, positive, and they deal with the other ones. And so I like it when I have foreign firms say things like, I saw that in the U.S. you got rejected over the same type of prior art, and you took whatever approach you took to it. That won't work over here because our rules are different. However, if you set up your claims like this, or you take this step, we can get you a result that's pretty comparable. So where they go, a layer or two deeper into how you get the result that you want, but they have to think about what result it is you're trying to get, as opposed to just, I'll do something and get you a patent. So that's kind of what I'm looking for as far as that partnership goes, especially with counsel outside the U.S. if I'm coming in it from a U.S. firm perspective, but of course you can turn that around to any perspective you want.
Thank you. Those are really, really insightful comments. I want to switch over to an important topic, for our society, which is diversity, and ask the question if you have any experience with diversity in your organizations. Is that a formal requirement or part of the criterion for hiring outside counsel? How do you monitor that? George, if you wouldn't mind leading off on that.
Sure. Yeah, so most recently in Chemtura/Lanxess, that really wasn't much of an issue. But going back to when I was at United Technologies, that was a big issue, a major corporate push across the board on diversity. And it was diversity both of the in-house staff and diversity of the supply base, including law firms that are working with you. And in that sort of environment, the thing that I found was very valuable beyond just getting the push that this is something you need to do is to be successful at implementing that. You need to embrace the whole ethos of diversity there, and ask yourself why you're doing it, what result you're trying to get, and then make sure that you're always looking for opportunities to have the right balance of diversity recognizing you don't sacrifice any quality for that. So it's always looking for the best and asking the question of, and how do we make this a diverse slate of candidates for us to work with? So, for example, if you're hiring internally, make sure the recruiters that are delivering you these slates of candidates have an eye towards delivering a diverse slate of candidates. When you're looking at outside firms, I'll take it first step. If you're looking at new outside firms, then you consciously say, okay, much like we do for in-house hiring, where we look for a diverse slate of candidates, let's make sure we have a slate of firms that brings diversity to us, whether because the firms might be a minority woman-owned law firm, and there are a number of those out there that I've had great success with, or whether it's a bigger, more traditional law firm but has a diverse slate of attorneys on staff that they can apply to your matters, and then you have the discussion with them about making sure that those folks apply to your matters. But it's the sort of internalizing the ethos yourself, and then making sure you take the steps to implement that as you go through, whether it's internal hiring or dealing with law firms.
Great.
Yes, so
Anyone
this
else
is Catherine. Yes, sure. This is Catherine. I'm really glad to hear that George and companies like Lanxess and others are continuing to look at this particular topic. A couple of things just to point out. You got to recognize that diversity and its definition as defined in the U.S. is much different than diversity as it might be defined globally. So if we're talking about, diversity in the U.S., there's a number of ways that can be defined, race, sexual orientation, et cetera, et cetera. And we want to have inclusive environments because for a number of reasons, include the fact that our customers are diverse, and so we want to make sure our vendors and our staff are diverse. Another point, just internally, in terms of hiring, et cetera, in terms of having a diverse slate, I think very frequently, and George kind of hinted at it, and it's sort of a hot button issue for me as someone who's, a Black woman in the intellectual property space. Frequently, the term, we always are questioning quality when we're talking about, are we going to have diverse outside counsel, or even are we going to have diverse candidates internally? And I really want us to be challenged to separate those conversations. There are plenty of diverse practitioners inside and outside who provide quality work products, and no one, including me, wants to have any work product coming from anyone, regardless of their status on the diversity spectrum, that's not high quality. So I think there's a tendency to think that you may have to sacrifice one for the other. And I'm not saying that that's what you're implying, George. This is just a generic comment, because it's always, those two things are always sort of brought up together. And I really want to separate those two, because everyone wants to have high quality. If I'm working for GE, if I'm working for myself, I worked outside, I want my quality, my work product to be the best. And you don't have to sacrifice quality in favor of diversity. That being said, I think some of the things that GE has done on the diversity front, frankly, it's just been, our successes have come in waves, and there's been time when there's been more of a focus than others, both the outside counsel and the internal diversity statistics, if you will. We do kind of keep track of whether or not there are diverse candidates that are working on our matters, but not frequently enough do we make decisions in terms of, how we're going to pare down or cull our outside counsel vendors based on that. So sometimes, when we have a leader who's passionate about it, it provides a window, and I've experienced that myself when, being able to hire and provide a more inclusive outside counsel staff and internally as well in terms of being able to, hire women and other diverse candidates. And we have to go beyond just the slate because unfortunately we're still all kind of victims to implicit bias, where you may think that, just because you see a diverse slate of candidates, you kind of done your job and you've checked the box. But if you really want to see and make strides, you have to make some intentional decisions. You have to go beyond the typical candidates. You have to, go beyond 2 doors down your office and, choose someone who may have a different perspective from you. And all of that adds to the value ultimately of the IP that's created and the workplace that's created and, makes our whole world better. There's a lot of training right now that's been done and research that's been done by the ABA on implicit bias. GE has brought in consultants to talk to leaders, executives, and above about this particular issue. And I highly encourage you and your organizations to consider implicit bias training. It goes outside of just, U.S. diversity training. It's all of the ways that we tend to favor people who are more like ourselves, whether that's internally or externally. And I think that it's a really, really effective tool to just kind of get a look at yourself, do a self-check, and see how you can, go beyond some of the things that may just seem natural, even if you're not intending to, kind of continue down to work only with people who look or think or what have you, are just near you. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. And again, I encourage, and I'm very heartened to hear that other organizations are continuing to put an emphasis on this. I've seen it in programs like PLI that are starting to integrate a diversity segment into their panels and, various trainings around in the legal profession. So while we have a lot of work to do, I think we can all be a part of moving the needle forward.
Thank you, Catherine. So why don't we move on now to our next topic. Let's talk a little bit about tools that you guys find helpful in your day-to-day practice. What's working? Like, what tools do you find yourself, consistently turning to? You yourself, not just your staff, but I'm really interested to hear about what tools you guys use and what's maybe not working for you and what's on your wish list. David, you want to start off on that one?
Sure. Thanks, Michael. Just to pick up on the last comments by Catherine, very well said to begin with. I would just add briefly, groupthink is something that I try to avoid at all costs. I know that there's, I know I have no idea how much I don't know. So getting a diverse set of advisors geographically, from an ethnicity perspective, from a technical perspective, is really important because it's lonely to try to make decisions out there by yourself. And the other piece I would add is a commitment to diversity as a company, as a function, is important because at a place like Coady, we serve the world. And the number one role, I think, that we have as in-house counsel is making sure that we're connecting adequately with and serving our clients here so that we're aware of the issues. And anything that we can do to reach a diverse group of employees and cultures is a plus. Going over to tools, what I would say is I learned early, I got into the idea of using tools as much as possible from my former boss, Joe McGillicuddy, over at Avon. And I've been committed early to trying to find anything we can do to automate workflow. To give you an example, when we ask our outside counsel to draft an office action response, we want to give them all the tools we possibly can. We benefit from, with the P&G merger, with some pretty detailed IP strategies. A wonderful IP strategist here, Stephen Schofield, who's been doing it for 25 years. And we want to, since unlike a P&G or a J&J, we don't have patent counsel in-house all over the world. We have to create work-sharing tools that allow our outside counsel to agree to work with us in different ways and to share information. So a couple of examples of that. Foundation IP is a program, and I will give a shout out to one of the firms we use for outside counsel, Schwegman Lundberg. They've been very innovative in developing a number of these tools. Foundation IP is a key. It's a must-have. Doesn't have to be that particular product, but it could be something like an Anaqua or no longer the Corpio. Anything that's sort of a patent knowledge management tool is essential. Why is it essential? Because in one place, we can put our patent IP strategy, we can store what's happened around the world in terms of different office actions and responses, and we can take a look at the metrics and take a look at the information that's there and make a quick decision. How important is this case to our business? Is it as important as it was 10 years ago? How important is it in this particular country? How much effort do we need to put in to get the claims to where we need to be? And do we need to file a divisional to try to continue to protect white space? Having all those things at your disposal is really important. A couple other tools that are important for us. Again, we're really lean. We always struggle to try to make sure that we, in a first-to-file world, get patent inventions looked at quickly and acted upon. And we're very cognizant of the fact that there's a lot of FTO work to do, and that's probably job one for us, as George said. So Questel has been great they have a very simple invention portal, which allows us to put, send out a link to inventors. Inventors put their inventions in. One of my favorite parts is the inventors cannot move the invention disclosure forward until they actually do a prior art search and engage with references, which is a great screen. And it then connects those inventors in with their management, with our IP manager, and finally with me to liaise with outside counsel. We're actually in the process of taking that tool. One of my favorite things to do is to take tools that work really well and break them to see what else we can get out of them. And we're trying to use that tool to basically jerry-rig it to serve as a freedom to operate tool, where we hope at some point you might be able to look at a large data set of freedom to operate requests and start assigning risk scores to those based on what market, what type of technology, what competitors, et cetera, to be able to get you to an 80-20 situation where you can quickly turn around an initial read and then understand what resources are needed to bring that FTO to conclusion.
Hey, David, this is Catherine. I'm really curious as to your comments around saving the IP strategy. Can you provide any kind of color on what that looks like? It's something that we've been just kind of challenged with determining, what is the best way to, memorialize what the strategy was at the time of filing and also potentially update it should that strategy change over time. Is there something that you all are doing specially or anything that you can share, that's not proprietary?
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty low tech for right now. And I will flag one of the biggest issues I always wrestle with here, and I don't have a good answer, is how you maintain attorney-client privilege when you put a document on a system like a Questel or on a common share board. So what we've tried to do with something like Questel is very much limit access or have no access on Questel for any evaluation of particular patents, sort of the FTO piece. For the invention strategy itself, it can be as low tech as using a share drive, a password protected share drive, and having the strategies there. And then as needed, what we actually do here is we do a weekly docket meeting for an hour and 90 minutes. We go through the cases coming up over the next 6 weeks. We've painstakingly, over the 2 years I've been here, individually tagged 3,000 patent cases with what division, what technology, what strategy, et cetera. So sitting here with our, I will typically set up a call with our US, our European, our Japanese, sometimes our Japanese, Chinese, Mexican, Brazilian counsel, and we'll be able to quickly identify what IP strategy, pull up, take the 5 minutes then, pull up the relevant sections of that IP strategy document, package them together, and send them off to the outside counsel saying, take a look at this, take a look at what's been, go into this link on FIP, and you'll see what's been done before in a different country. And we've been doing that, heavily relying on our IP strategist and on our paralegal to pull some of those threads together.
Yeah, so is the strategy just like a label or is it a paragraph, just out of curiosity?
No, I mean, this is more P&G's approach. They were very detailed in terms of, here's what the technology is, here's the problem that it solves, here's where we think competitors might go, here's how we would file to pick a fence around to try to protect it. So it's fairly detailed.
Okay, so it's akin to some of the things that would be in a disclosure.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, sorry. I don't know if you had any comments, George, but that was.
Yeah, and again, it's we hold those centrally. We lock them down from a password perspective standpoint, and we use those weekly meetings to kind of excerpt out the necessary part and package it together with the office action.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you, David.
This is George. Let me toss something else that's going to go. And I agree with those comments about having a great IP docket system that is communicated, that you use to communicate with your outside counsel and the inventors and all that. One other tool or set of tools that I've had an opportunity to use to a pretty great extent are going to be forms libraries or things like that. And they can vary between something that's generated internally. So for example, generate internal standard contract templates or templates for other sorts of things, so that when you so when we get beyond just talking about acquiring patents and things like that, when you get into doing a license, when you get into doing some other transaction that involves IP, that you have good solid templates to work off of that are consistent with the company's risk tolerance. So that's something that, if you're a small group, is good, because it definitely enhances your ability to deliver good quality work on a timely basis. And if you're a larger group, it's helpful because it helps provide some uniformity across a larger group of lawyers who may be providing services to a group. So that's something else that I suggest. So either something that's homegrown, we've done some of that. I've also done a little bit of that with external sources. One service I've used is Practical Law, that's related to Westlaw and ties into some of that. But that's the same type of thing, that there's a number of templates that you can use to help you with delivering services quickly and efficiently.
Thanks, George.
Yeah, as far as GE on the tools front, we may be a bit behind the curve relative to some companies. We've had our own homegrown tool to store patent-related documents, disclosures, et cetera. A number of homegrown tools that we interface with our inventors with, and all of those are sort of linked together. But we're finding, particularly as we're going through this time as a company where we're acquiring, divesting left and right, that moving to a commercial tool, in this case, Anaqua, is just, we have to do it at this point, because it's hard to keep up with all of the needs that these complex transactions have to go with it, and do some of the easier tagging and culling functions that are required whenever you want to sift through and sort through a portfolio quickly and easily without complex reporting. So we're going through that process now. It's not easy, but we're really excited about where it's going to take us as a company, particularly given all the challenges and different M&A agreements, et cetera, that we're having ongoing as the company is kind of shifting and changing into the new GE, if you will. So we're really excited about kind of entering into the new phase of tools. So I might be calling on some of you on the call, and David and George as well, to see what's been working, because it's kind of a new day for GE on the tool space.
Sure. And this is David. The one other one I would add, and those are great points, Catherine and George, and I agree, especially in Practical Law. But the other one that's been really helpful is basically sole practitioner has been an IP annuity management tool. And we've been using Black Hills IP Annuities, which is based off the Patent Buddy database software. The beauty of that system is that when you're having your inevitable discussions with inventors who say, oh, I know the patent's 18 years old and it's filed in 18 countries, and it's, but it's one of the best things I worked on, and I'm sure we're going to use it, and I'm sure somebody will come into that space tomorrow. You can go to data and you can literally tell them, here's how much it would cost to pay this individual case.
Yeah.
Here's what the annuities would be amortized over 5 years. By the way, here's who's reverse and forward cited this patent. As you can see, no one's touched this space in 5 years. So tell me again why I want to spend $25,000 in annuities. That's incredibly helpful when you're trying to manage, a situation where you've got to deal with a really small budget.
Yeah, I mean, small budget or large budget, we definitely use a tool right now that helps us quickly calculate how much is going to be left in payments for a particular case. And that is always a heavily weighted factor into whether or not we're going to kind of proceed with an application or family, et cetera. Before we got off the tool subject, I'm just curious as to whether either of you have been involved in utilizing any of the metrics that are available around U.S. patent examiner data. So I know that was kind of a hot button thing over the last couple of years, learning a little bit of the deep learning around how do examiners behave, individual examiners behave. Have any of you all explored that?
This is George. So I've heard those pitches, and I've been on a bunch of webinars where people have talked about it. I've not really delved into that, and part of that has been the practice that I've generally had. So when we were at Cantora/Lanxess, there are certain chemistries that we were working with, and you're always working with the same examiners. And then when I was at Pratt & Whitney, it was pretty similar, that you're actively in front of all of those, the examining group that's relevant to your technology and engaging with the examiners. So you pretty much have a good feel for where they're coming out just based on your personal interaction with them. So I never really delved into sort of those external metrics, and instead relying more on the fact that regardless of where we are, we're always repeat customers for the same examining groups and the same examiners. So you have the feel for, here's the examiner that hates us, or quote hates us and always rejects us over this type of thing, and here's what we've done successfully, versus, okay, this is a good examiner. She seems to get what's going on pretty well. We put these sorts of arguments out there and we get smooth sailing. So, but that's all based on personal experience, or experience of the group of lawyers I'm working with.
Thanks.
Quick time check here. It's already 1:53, so we only have about 5 or so minutes left for discussion. Let's end off with a topic that's gaining in attention, and that's trade secrets. I saw a study recently that proved that trade secret owners are enjoying a surprisingly high success rate in the courts in terms of enforcing their IP rights, their trade secret rights against infringers. However, as you know, not all inventions are suitable for trade secret protection. Do you guys have any sort of formal process, first of all, around weighing trade secret versus patent protection? And I'm also curious to know, have you made an effort to catalog or list or specifically and explicitly identify the company's key trade secrets?
Yeah, so this is Catherine. I can take the lead on this. Determination of whether or not a particular disclosure or invention idea should qualify as a trade secret versus a patent versus publication is made on every single disclosure. It's part of our process. It's part of one of the things I think that GE has actually done right. And, anyone who knows anything about trade secret law, if you don't keep it and actively manage it as a trade secret, then it's not a secret. So we are very, very, we've done very well at making sure that we keep our trade secrets out of the general populace of patent applications that are widely available, and that there's some extra protections. And in the recent years, we've made some additional efforts to make sure that, our even most secret trade secrets have even higher security and permissions in place. So I think, just given the size of GE, we found in recent years, and all of a lot of the bad actors that we've experienced in terms of misappropriation of trade secrets or IP in general, sometimes they've come internally, and these are things that you can read in the news. So I'm not letting anything, the cat out of the bag there. We found that it's just really important to place an emphasis on how we're managing our key trade secrets. And so we've taken some additional effort to make sure that those are kept secluded from the rest of the data, and that the appropriate permissions are in place. So that's something that I think we are continuing to do, and but a few years ago, this was a major emphasis, and it continues to be a high priority for GE.
Yeah, this is George. Let me jump in. The notion of trade secret versus patents versus say non-patent disclosure, so taking a paper and publishing it at a conference or something. Think about what you do with it. It is a discussion that comes up routinely, and when we come out on the trade secret side, the question we always ask is, okay, it's a great concept. Do we actually internally, and the answer you get depends on which business you're talking about, have the wherewithal to take all the steps needed to really protect this as a trade secret. So if we say, yes, we want to keep this as a trade secret, and the business is willing to take the steps to do it, we'll do it. Otherwise, what frequently has happened, at least more so in the past than now, I guess, is things default into something that's notionally a trade secret. We don't patent it. We don't make any effort to publicize it, but there's no particularly robust protection around it. And that's something that puts you in a situation where it could work, but don't hold your breath that is necessarily going to work. But that's really been my experience to date, that you often end up in that sort of middle ground, because when you go through the steps of identifying what you need to do to protect something as a trade secret, as far as isolating the data and taking other steps to protect it, the business or technical community you're dealing with often says they're just not willing to do that. So that's been kind of my practical experience with it. But the question always comes up, and it's where you end up is kind of the pragmatic. Well, we're not going to intentionally publish it, but we'll kind of take our chances. That seems to be a default response that I've seen frequently.
Well, this has been great. We're already, go ahead, David.
Yes, this is David. I'd be happy to add my 2 cents, but since we're close to the hour, I don't know if you want to see if there's questions before we close out. Yeah, go ahead, chime in. No, that's okay. I don't know if you have any questions.
Yeah, actually, since we're virtually at the end of the call, I'll skip the question segment of this presentation because we simply have run out of time. So let me just take this opportunity to thank today's panelists for really a robust discussion across a wide range of topics. So thank you very much. I'd also like to thank our audience for participating, and last but not least, my staff, in particular Tom DeFelice and TJ Pia, for their very instrumental help. We really hope that you got something valuable out of today's presentation, and please let us know if you'd be interested in being a speaker on a future Counsel to Counsel broadcast. Give us your feedback. There'll be a very short, I promise, 30-second poll at the very end of this presentation. We'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to contact me directly, you have my contact information. It's up on the screen. And last but not least, you'll be receiving a recording of today's presentation in your inbox within the next couple of days. So again, thank you very much to everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.